Boom. What's up, guys? We are live. We got Martin Goldberg. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
I think so, yeah.
Joining us. And we're going to have a discussion / debate about some different ideas. So, yeah, this is going to be a good time. So, let's start off with, I guess, a little bit of introduction just about yourself and your channel.
Yeah, sure. So when I started on YouTube, this was a few years back. So I was mainly focused on educational, career advice, personal finance content. And it happened that someone said, "Hey, do you want to talk about MGTOW? Can you make a video on that?" And I was like, I don't know what a MGTOW is. So I decided to research it, and I made one MGTOW video. Next thing you know, one thing led to another. People were saying, "You're a MGTOW content creator. You're part of the manosphere." And I was like, I still to this day kind of wonder if that was a good decision. But in any case, what I found, even though I do agree with a lot of the core MGTOW precepts and philosophy, is that a lot of the guys on the internet who say they're MGTOW, it seems almost like men going on strike. So it's, I'm going MGTOW, but I'm looking over my shoulder to see if women are chasing me or upset. And if you were to talk about stuff such as, being MGTOW outside of talking about women or other topics entirely, these dudes, like, it was their prime directive. They would just bring women into the debate, and it would get a little bit tiresome, I think. Regardless, why I got interested in the black pill is really more from an academic standpoint. I would talk about in my videos, I believe in self-improvement, investing in one's own future. But there were some guys that would say, so if I was talking about as a teenager, getting IOI from women, but being socially awkward, not knowing what to do, and how I overcame that, they would say, well, that's fine, but you have to consider that you're over 6 feet, you're white passing. You can't dismiss that as though it's irrelevant. And I was very resistant to it because I said, no, it's about the person, and you control what's going to happen in your life by your own efforts and actions and willingness to strive. But as time has gone on, we've had these kind of negative headlines, guys going postal, more commonly occurring, but perhaps less well reported, is the guys taking their own lives. And society doesn't tend to value men. They treat men like they're a disposable utility. So I said, let me do a good faith study. Let me figure out, is there any credibility to what black pillars are saying? And I did that last year. It was about 7 months of research and writing, looking at everything from PUA, red pill texts, social psychological research, even some feminist perspectives, just to throw it in there. Whatever material has actually been written by self-described black pillars, by academics talking about incels. And what I came away with in the book that I published, which is called Understanding Overcoming the Black Pill, is that much of what they're saying, if you look at the research, is accurate, but it's going to depend upon context. And it will also, the way that you respond is going to, you have control over how you respond. Like, it's not mandated that you become a fatalist. Just like, and I mean, we can get into this more, but you'll hear a lot about negativity, and you need to be positive. But positivity in of itself can be a little bit misleading, because you could have a guy who is in a stereotypically blue-pilled relationship, dating a girl or married, and she's verbally, emotionally abusive. And he says, maybe she's cheating on him too, but he says, I'm going to be positive. Our love's going to prevail at the end of the day if I just believe in it. So you can be positive, and that can be masking an assault on your self-respect. You can be positive, and it could be to your own disadvantage. A guy who's, let's say, more red-pilled PUA, we would think, okay, he's got a better life. There was recently a prominent PUA who actually committed suicide.
Oh, Krause?
I don't know if it was Krause. Tom Torero, I think the name was.
Oh, yeah, Tom Torero. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
And so, like, if we just take it as, like, this is kind of, I don't know if the correct term is like a Renaissance man lifestyle. You're living, you're pursuing women. It seems odd that that would happen if we have these very strict lines. But what happens is that human beings are nuanced. People are going to have different experiences, and they're more complicated than just this label or that label. And so what I've always tried to encourage on my channel is try to look at it from try to take away your emotional investment, your ego, and just try to look at it and see, is there any validity or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point. I'm also not a big fan of labels, right? Because when you adopt a label, you have to basically side with everything they say. So categorically, I would be considered like a PUA channel, but I don't agree with a lot of PUA concepts. Like, there's some things that I agree more with black pillars on, right? For example, I think looks is one, right? Like a lot of PUA channels say either looks don't matter or looks are minimally important, versus I think looks are important, right? So yeah, I do think that it's not always a good idea to just classify yourself, but at the same time, I think it's also helpful to, in order to help other people understand your ideas, at least put, like, I don't think labels are all bad. I think sometimes it's good to give yourself a variety of labels so that people can understand you better, because it's like it's kind of hard for everyone to like watch all your videos and then, okay, this guy believes this and this and this. But yeah, I do agree with you that people are very nuanced. So okay, so you mentioned you did a big study. What were the takeaways? Like, what did you find that you agree with the black pill on? What did you disagree with them on?
What I thought was interesting, and what I attribute to the main reason why we even have an incel phenomenon in the Western world, is various shifts. I mean, you can look at it historically, but various shifts in more recent years, as in, like, let's say the last 60 or 70, shifts in economic power, obviously technological development, and a big part of it is actually gender ratios. So you have a lot of dudes in the manosphere who talk about, oh, back in the 50s was so great, back in the 50s, but there's very little consideration of why in the 50s it was a little bit different. In fact, you can go in the early 1900s and you have a relatively robust feminist movement in the United States. Up until the 1930s, you have indications of women being told, don't just settle for one man. You should be kind of like playing the field, as we would say. But what happened was that in obviously World War II erupted. And when you get on a war footing, typically the woke stuff takes a back seat, maybe less so nowadays. But in any case, we lost around 400,000 people in World War II, most of them men. And that's going to have an impact, of course, on the total men available. But perhaps more importantly, America became this global power. We're stationed in Europe. We're stationed in the Philippines and Japan, regions which had suffered a substantial decline in male population, right? A lot of German male population was decimated, UK, France, Italy, Japan, certainly. So not only were there less men available, but American men had further options than ever before. And so the theory is that the reason we saw these sort of traditional women in the 1950s, partially it was because they were facing far more competition. Partially it was because they didn't have the same economic opportunities. So a normal guy in the 1950s who has a basic job is going to be very appealing, even if he is not particularly good looking. But obviously women have attained far more education. They're more integrated in the economy. They're not dependent on men. And consequently, they're going to have higher standards. You've had, with like birth control now is an implant, so there's even less of a uncertainty there. So there isn't a whole lot of incentive for people to marry at an early age. And this is something that I think it was the Institute of Family Studies talked about. That one study or poll that said there was a high number of male virgins, I think it was in 2018 or 2019, they attributed it to people getting married later. But if people are getting married later, you have more of an incentive to kind of just play the field. That's going to be disadvantageous to average men. And so obviously the stakes are higher. If you're average, you're going to have to put in a lot more work to counterbalance the environment that you're in, essentially.
Okay. Well, let me just, because someone said that my audio is a little off, so let me just fix that real quick. All right, guys, how's the audio now? Is this better? Tell me in the comments if you can hear me fine or if it's like fucked up. And then we'll keep going. I just want to fix this mic. Maybe I'll have to like hold it or something. That's gonna get real annoying. Let me see if I can just get this onto my shirt. Okay, yeah. So let me know if everyone says it seems good. All right, so let's keep going then. Okay, so I guess let me get your opinion on this. Are you familiar with the content creator Sandman? He's like MGTOW, I think.
Yeah, vaguely. I've watched maybe one video. So.
Okay, yeah, I had him on my channel about a week ago and asked him this question, and I want to get your answer as well. But basically, I said, what is the difference between black pill and MGTOW? And this is what he said. He said that they both agree on what the problems are. But he said that black pill is like nihilism, right? It's like, fuck, these are the problems, versus MGTOW is about making a conscious decision to, I guess, walk away from women, or at the very least, like, not focus a lot of your energy on it. So would you agree with that categorization, or you think he's missing something?
I mean, I'm not sure, because I've had some interesting interactions with MGTOWs, which would make me think that they aren't really walking away. I don't pretend to speak for all black pillars. The ones that I've interacted with seem to be big on, get a passport, change your location, go to greener pastures if you believe that exists. There are some dudes who advocate for like play for pay. I've never done that myself. I don't think that most guys in the United States, I don't think it's so bad that like, 95% of men in the United States have no hope unless they go overseas. I think there is a lot of hyperbole, which is not
Yeah.
just exclusive to black pill circles. But
No, I agree.
yeah, I mean, I view the black pill, it's an ultra realist take on not just necessarily dating. You could expand it out to politics, like should we bother voting? Does it matter? That sort of thing. But again, it comes down to how you want to respond. And because we don't all look the same, we don't have all the same personalities, we're not all extroverts or introverts, people's reaction will be different. I don't purport to tell people you have to act this way, you have to think this way. But I think looking at it and understanding the knowledge, the real benefit is that you have more empathy with these people and you're less likely to just kind of dismiss them at the outset, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I was doing a good amount of research on your channel today, and you seem like a very reasonable person. Like I was pleasantly impressed, I guess. I mean, there's definitely a few things I disagree with you on, but overall, you seem like you're pretty well balanced and reasonable. I guess for the outside person, what's confusing is when you ask most black pillars, okay, what's the black pill? They all say, well, black pill is giving you the unflattering truth, right? But if you ask a red pill, they will say literally the same exact thing. No, red pill is the truth, right? But both the black pill and red pill, they have different, those two ideologies on average don't like each other. And those two communities don't like each other. And they both have largely different version of the truth. So it's like both communities, when you ask them what the definition is, you say, well, we're looking for the truth, right? But what they say the truth is different. So to like an outside perspective, it's confusing. Like, what does this community stand for? Because you would make the argument that any community, even like the blue pill community, would say, no, we're looking for the truth. Like, I don't think there's any community that's like, we're about, lying to ourselves, right? Like,
Yeah.
I doubt there's communities doing that. So what's your take on that? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I would never pretend that like all red pillars are the same. I was just listening to a discussion. I think it was Alpha Male Lifestyle and the Realist Philosopher. The Realist Philosopher, I think, associates more with the red pill, but he's actually quite fascinating. What the main thing I would say I see with the red pill, and again, it's not everyone, but it's the commercialization of the red pill, which I think has affected this to where almost some red pill content creators seem to want to create a new matrix. Like the red pill is you're breaking out of the matrix, but it's almost they want to create a new red pill matrix that can contain men, and obviously you can make money off of it, which I'm not hating on anyone for trying to run a business, but it's like I've seen this trope a lot. So it's, well, what women want is a guy who's got big muscles and he hates feminism and he's a conservative. I'm like, well, maybe some women. But one of the sources I cited in my book is Datanomics. It's a few years old, but it's still quite informative. And he was comparing, I think it was Swarthmore College campus with Caltech. Swarthmore, of course, is extraordinarily liberal. And the guys that go there on average are probably not giga-chads. They're what these other men in the red pill community or some circles would say are like the liberal soy boys, the Obamacare pajama boy, if you guys have seen that image. And they're reporting that they're getting like threesomes. Because there's so many more women going to that college, the ratio's in their favor. They're arguably more of an alpha male. Whereas you go to Caltech, which is, a little bit more conservative, male dominated, major in STEM, brah, and you have more monogamous relationships, which depending on which red pill you're talking about, that could be beta male if you're not spinning plates or whatever. So like I said, there's going to be variation. I think there's too much of this in the red pill. They're projecting who they are. And I know that I'm guilty of that. And I've been guilty of that in the past, which is why I always try to say, like with the black pillars, even though I don't struggle with dating like some guys might, I'm not going to say, therefore, it's all about self-improvement, because if a guy's 5'5" and maybe also socially awkward, he might need a different approach. And I don't want to just say his opinion is irrelevant because it doesn't reflect my experience, essentially.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. I would agree with that. There's nothing I disagree with what you just said. As I was going through your channel, there's two things that, and again, I didn't finish going through all your videos. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other things that I would agree with. But these are the two that I just wrote down. So you have a video. I went through like your videos, but based on what's the most popular. One is why are there so many virgins, which is actually something I've been curious about myself. So I think we can all agree on that. There's a lot more virgins in terms of men now than there were like it's an epidemic, so as to speak. And you make the argument that it's technology, and I actually agree with you a lot on that. Like I think that technology has definitely changed the game in a lot of ways. So I think that here's kind of my take on that. I think because of technology, like nowadays, the rich are getting richer than ever, right? So if you're top 1%er or whatever, 0.1%er, like it's easier and easier to make money because your reach is bigger. Like you can, you can diverse into a whole bunch of industries really fast, and a lot of barriers to entry are gone. So if you're someone who has capital, you can make a lot more money. Well, I think it's like that with pussy. Like if you're a, celebrity or just a guy who's at the very peak of his game in terms of your competition, then it's never been easier to get laid before. Like you have hot chicks DMing you on Instagram, and just it's easier to get laid. Like think about it this way: if you were a celebrity 30 years ago, how would you get laid? Yeah, if you went out to a bar, some chick might recognize you and you could bang her. Maybe some chicks send you fan mail, but that was about it, right? Nowadays, you have pussy coordinators, and you have hundreds of chicks DMing you on Instagram. Your pussy coordinator just picks out the ones that are going to be more to your taste, and you bang them, right? So it's never been easier, but there's only finite resources. So then the guys at the bottom 50% get fucked. So I thought that was interesting, and I think we're kind of in agreement on that. Like, would you say?
Yeah, and it's actually interesting. I didn't read this before publishing the book, but I recently have been going through some of Rush's old content. And I thought it was really
Oh,
fascinating. His initial book, Bang, he says that he thought, at least for himself, he got a motorcycle, a nice place, a job, this status was going to be valuable. But then he said, no, and in fact, it was more of the personality. Then, if you go to a book that he published some years later, he says, I have to admit that game is only going to do so much for a large number of men, and they're better off cultivating status. I thought that was a very interesting admission. And I think you were doing a stream with another guy, the one he said he's slept with like over 1,000 men.
John, yeah.
Yeah, him. And I think one of his lines was like, I'm a DJ, I've got all these popular clients. So I don't know if that's just a way to start talking with the woman, but it did seem interesting that that is a form of status that you're trying to tell this woman, look, I pal around with celebrities or whatever. So
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both good. Definitely status is very important, and I would say, yeah, if you have an option between being a celebrity or having really good game, you're gonna get more. You're gonna get more pussy by being a celebrity with no game. I would say that it's advantageous to have both if possible. I think status is probably for most people harder to cultivate than game, though. I think like just for most people, status is not really that realistic. Like let's say you're an engineer or you work in finance, it's pretty hard for you to get status, right? Like yeah, for me, I'm a YouTuber, like that's kind of the name of the game. But I think for a lot of people, status is pretty tricky. Um, yeah,
now, no, sorry. Have you been able to use YouTube like to project status, or do you just kind of keep that separate when you go after women?
well, I've been able to sleep with a few chicks off my quote unquote YouTube status, but the vast majority of it, my YouTube status didn't help me because in like if we put it in the grand scheme of things, me having like 100,000 subscribers is not a big deal at all. Like that's
Yeah.
pretty small. I live in Miami. Most people are like have a million followers on Instagram here, so like even though it may seem large to someone who's getting started on YouTube for like a hot chick, like my status is like nothing.
So now, have you been on Fresh and Fit? I wasn't sure about that.
Nah, I'm not really. I don't. Me and those guys don't really get along.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Why do you ask?
Well, I think aren't they located in Miami as well?
Yeah, they live down the street from me. I
Oh,
could
okay.
walk 2 minutes. I would be at their house. But yeah, no, we don't really like each other, and there's a whole long backstory for that. But yeah. But yeah, anyway, going through. So okay, so that was the thing I agreed with you on. So here's what I disagree with you on. I feel like you sort of miscategorized a lot of the opinions in the pickup community, and maybe you no longer believe this. But the two specific points that I heard you mention in one of your videos is that PUAs, they're kind of pro cucking, and they're also pro encouraging men to date trannies. And I guess maybe I'm missing something, but I honestly don't know anyone in the pickup community who is encouraging people to do that. So maybe you know someone, but I really don't.
When you say like promote cucking, you mean as in cucking other men?
Like cucking, like as in like letting their girl get fucked by other dudes.
I no, I've come across that in the PUA community. Not necessarily big names that I'd say openly admit it, but I have come across that. Yeah.
Okay. So who exactly are the PUAs who are like encouraging that?
Well, like I said, not specifically like figures, but more of like individuals who are, I guess, lower level. What I would note is that as far as the cucking is concerned, and that was actually just recently in Roos's book, is the promotion of like mate poaching, which I think is kind of interesting as a concept in the sense that, and if again, not everyone says that the red pill and PUA is the same thing. There's some
Mhm.
conflict about that. I've gotten some pushback on that, but uh, you'll have guys talking about like the brotherhood of men, and then they'll be like, well, mate poaching is okay. And it seems like,
What is mate poaching for? I'm not even
okay, so
familiar with
yeah,
myself.
mate poaching, it basically taking another guy's girl.
Okay, got it.
And that's actually, there's a competitive element. I don't know about the PUAs nowadays, but I know that's been mentioned in a couple of books that I've read where that's like a sign of status. If you take the girl who's married or you take the girl who's in a relationship. And I think it's interesting because sometimes you'll hear that, and sometimes you'll hear more of the brotherhood of men thing. It seems to depend on what the topic or the audience is, but it will almost appear like at times this brotherhood of men only includes certain men, which I
Mhm.
think is kind of interesting. But
Yeah, that is interesting. I would say the mate poaching is much more 50-50. So some people believe, yeah, if you can, whatever, bang someone else's girl, it's okay. It's survival of the fittest. And some other content creators like me would say, no, I'm not really like into stealing people's girls.
right.
But so I would say that one is kind of you see both sides of it in the pickup community. But the encouraging cucking and the dating trannies, I don't know any coaches or like thought leaders or people who have a YouTube following who encourage that. So I would say that one, those two things are not really common in the pickup community. Like those are would be like maybe some random people who don't even have YouTube channels like believe in that, but I don't think that's a common like tenant of the pickup community. Those two things.
I think it's possible. Then again, I think it might be something that people would be somewhat cagey to admit. Um, it could be something that's going on, but you're less likely to broadcast for obvious reasons. So I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see. We may disagree on that, but
Yeah, I just don't see what would be the advantage of like telling dudes to date trannies. You know what I mean? Like I don't see what's like the gain in it. Uh because I guess it's I don't know. Like I don't see why that would be like something that I guess unless you personally find trannies like unless someone finds trannies attractive, what would be like the upside of like telling your audience, yo guys, you guys got bang trannies. It's not like
well, I think it could just be. I mean, as bad as the sexual inflation has become, it might give them better options. Weirdly enough, I was on the Blender app, which
Mm,
is kind of, I think Blender, Badoo, and all these others are pretty much it's the same software they run on. But I'm like, holy heck! I mean, there's a hell of a lot of trannies on there. Now, most of them are obvious, right? But I could see where if there was more of that gray area, I could see where if depending on what type of PUA it is, it might be like, well, just go and do it for the sake of it. So, I mean, who knows? Yeah.
yeah, I guess my last point on this is I guess you got to be like not you but just we in general have to be careful of attributing what some fringe people in the community recommend as a overarching theme of that community. So, for example, TFM, Turfling Monkey, was on my channel talking about how he's like in a relationship with a sex doll, right? But that wouldn't be really fair for me to say. Well, black pillars or they're all about banging sex dolls, right? Like, because that's not really, I think, common. Like, pretty much every other person I've talked to in the black pill community or the MGTOW community is like, nah, dude, we don't do that. Like, we don't date sex
Well,
dolls.
so it's interesting. If you go on MGTOW.tv, which is run by Alpha Male Lifestyle, he's a very cool guy.
Yeah,
Um,
I actually got an email from them the other day asking me if I want to go on there.
yeah, it's actually a very good platform. Honestly, it's
I'll look
some
into
might
it.
argue it's superior to some of the other alt tech platforms, but I do see a decent amount of content. In fact, even like ads being promoted. And granted, that's not, of course, going to be all MGTOW, but I would say it's a decent portion of MGTOW because it's considered in a way like almost, you know, how a feminist might say if she was a really whack job over the top, like, I'll be a lesbian, I don't need a man at all in my existence. There are some MGTOWs that are on that level of like, to
Mhm.
truly walk away from women, you have to replace women. And as I talked about in the book briefly, from the research I've done, there seems to be a somewhat mainstream, if you could call it that, community that utilizes the sex dolls, and they see it as essentially like toy, or actually in China, one guy described it as an alternative to using a prostitute. But then, you know, TFM, who I think is an interesting character, he, he said like, well, you know, this is the way, you know, going your own way, whatever. I think he wrote a book that was kind of inspired by Taoism, which is to some extent about finding peace and tranquility. But it was a couple of months back, or maybe it was last year actually. But he was just like, he got all upset because someone made fun of him for using a doll, and he started screaming on a live stream. And I was like, that
Oh,
doesn't
geez.
sound like you're really, you know, happy in your choices. And I could be wrong. Maybe it was just having a bad day. But, you know, I don't advocate that. I think that's for some guys if they really feel like it. But I think, like I said, most men, even in the West, they can probably find something. You might not, you know, if you're a 5 out of 10, you may not be getting a Stacy.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's be realistic. But I don't think like every guy has to go to that length. I think that's a very small portion of people.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I agree with what you said. I think most guys in the West can find something. If you are a very unattractive guy, you know, it may be unrealistic for you to get like a fucking, you know, Victoria's Secret model. Like I think, yeah, you should have realistic standards. And if you are unattractive and you do want to get that Victoria's Secret model, then it's going to be a very long, painful process. You're going to get rejected a lot. You might be able to get there. You can always be an outlier, but you know, the thing about being an outlier is you have to do a shitload of work, right? Like there's no outlier who gets to be an outlier just by, you know, slacking off, right? Like it takes a lot of work to be an outlier.
Right.
Yeah, I guess like kind of the last point I'll make on that is I guess this can apply for any community. Like I can imagine like, you know, if you're like a bodybuilder, right? And you're in the bodybuilding community and you just like to work out, you eat healthy, go to the gym, you're into training, and then someone, because there's some bodybuilders who take massive amounts of steroids and insulin and all that shit that just like basically destroys your body and gives you a heart attack by 35. If someone's like, yo, like you guys are all about like destroying your body for short-term gain, and you guys fucking inject insulin, and you're like, yo, I'm not about that. Like I'm just into like going to the gym and working out. So I guess that can be applicable for any community. But anyway, like I'll move on to the next point. So I guess this is like I wrote down 4 things that I see as my like issues with the black pill community. And I guess let's just go through them one by one. And you can tell me if like what you think about it, whether this is something you agree with, you disagree with, whether that's something that you believe in or you don't believe in. But the first one I have is extreme skepticism. So what I've noticed is that the black pill position is game doesn't exist. And so I've had like, you know, countless debates with black pill content creators and thought leaders. And whenever I show them any kind of evidence of the contrary, the argument is always the same. It's fake. Your infield is fake. That story is fake. That didn't happen. You're making this up. So I like kind of saw this as the equivalent of like a flat earther who says, well, the earth is flat. And then like a scientist shows them like a picture of the globe. It's like, well, you know, like you can see that there's oceans and the earth is round. And they say, well, that picture is fake. Well, that scientific data is fake. And I just see that as a very logically problematic is when you just have a position that you're dug in on. And then when you're shown evidence for the contrary, you just instantly dismiss it as fake because it goes against your pre-existing position.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, like I guess I'd put it to you this way. So if you take two guys that are both 5'5", about the same attractiveness, and one dude, let's say he puts 3 selfies on Tinder and he never goes out, and the other dude approaches 300 odd women. I think most of us would admit, assuming that the second guy doesn't catch a harassment charge, I think most people would admit he has more potential to find someone who would find, you know, it's okay, you'll
Yeah.
do whatnot. I don't think I wouldn't disagree with that. Maybe some black pillars would. At the same time, the question is, how much of game is something that actually exists and is really not ego projection? Because, and I tried hard to find this information. I was able to get some evidence of conversion rates for Krauser and also Roosh, and they weren't terribly impressive. By conversion, I'd refer to approaching to clapping cheeks, not, oh, I got a number and it went
Mhm.
nowhere. And I'm saying if these guys who are the seasoned PUAs and not terribly short or whatnot, if they're getting relatively low responses, I would suspect that an average dude is going to get similar, perhaps less, maybe more in some cases. But if you have game and it's not just probability, so if you go up to 100 women and only so many respond to you, is that because you have a specific skill that's tipping the balance, or is that because you happen to find someone who views you to be, you know, passable? And then, of course, the social skills matter. So that's one thing that I disagree with some black pillars, because if you have no communication competency, not all women are going to approach you. There are going to be women who are shy. There's women who are afraid of
Right.
rejection. Uh, but that's the question. So if you're going up and you're only managing to bag a certain percentage, does that mean that you have game, or does that just mean that probability wise you've talked to enough people where a certain number find okay, you're okay? The other dynamic is if you're approaching, as Roosh was renowned for doing, if you're approaching women who are like severely inebriated, is that game, or is that like, okay, she's drunk, you know? Because some women report that, and maybe that's just them, you know, kind of slut shield or whatever, but they'll say, I wouldn't have slept with that guy if I was sober. All right. So, I mean, I think where maybe we have a bit of a confusion is in the way that game is discussed, because I strived hard to find a clear definition, and it always seemed to be someone had their own version, and often it would be incorporating elements such as looks, such as status, such as whatnot. So that's kind of that's where I say I'm not convinced game is a thing. I do think, okay, a guy who has social skills and talks to enough women is liable to find some that will, you know, maybe sleep with him. So,
Yeah, so let's go through all those points. So I do think volume definitely matters, but I think that the argument I hear quite often in the black pill is, well, if game worked, then why would you get rejected? Wouldn't you be able to bang every chick? And that's sort of like saying, well, if sales work, shouldn't you be able to sell to every client? No, there's going to be still a lot of people who don't want your product. So just like I would say, sales is your ability to sell a product, but you still won't sell to every client. You won't even sell to 50%. You'll probably sell to 10% of the clients you talk to. But if you went from being able to sell to 5% of the clients you talk to being able to sell to 10% of the clients you talk to, well, then your sales skills improved, arguably, right? As long as all other factors are being equal. Well, I would say it's the same thing with game. If you uh, were able to sleep with 5% of the women that you talk to, and you went from that to being able to sleep with 10% of the chicks that you talk to, and all other factors are equal, well, then your game improved. Like, would
right.
you agree with that?
Well, I think it to a certain degree, but again, when I see like a Krauser, at least the stat I was able to find, I think it was 7% for Krauser. For
Right.
Roosh, it was 3 to 5%.
Mhm.
And now, you know, granted, you could say, well, there's different factors, age, location, whatnot. But if the guys that are very seasoned and are actually teaching the PUA are not doing, let's say, 30 to 40% consistently, I can see where the
Mm.
skepticism is going to come about. That doesn't mean, like I said, volume basis probability. You won't find someone if you try hard enough. It's just a question of how effective is it to where you can carry through from one to the next. You know, I absolutely believe social skills. If you practice them enough, you're more likely to know what to say. You're less likely to be kind of awkward, or you're more inclined to be able to continue a conversation. So those things do matter. But
Mm.
whether it's something akin to I don't know, like being a master chef and you can consistently deliver this, or at least pretty close to it, I think it's up for debate. So it's going to come down to the person, and different guys I think will thrive in different circumstances. And maybe the traditional way that PUAs talk about game is going to be less effective for guys nowadays. So, like I said, the book being Understanding Overcoming the Black Pill, I do talk about some suggestions for dudes, especially if they're severely, you know, introverted or whatnot, and they're less inclined to have a good social circle just from the get-go. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be like the chef thing where if you're a professional chef, you can deliver, really high quality food the vast majority of the time. It's going to be closer to sales. Because if you're a chef, there's no other people involved. It's just you and I guess food, right? Versus sales or game involves other people. And that's, people are individual beings. It's really hard to sometimes predict human behavior and all that. Plus, there's also a whole bunch of other factors that go into play. So I would say that game is much closer to sales. Like you would say you believe that sales is a skill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it would be like I would say it would be in the same token as sales. Like if you believe sales is a skill, then game is a skill as well to some extent. I would say this, like I guess to kind of give another example, I would use myself as an example. When I was between the age of I don't know, 18 and 21, I used to go out like 5, 6 nights a week to college parties and stuff like that. I would try to meet girls anywhere and everywhere, and I was maybe like getting laid like once a year or something like that. Like
Yeah.
my conversion ratio was terrible. I had to talk to like 1,000 girls to maybe sleep with one. Versus nowadays in the last like 4 years, I go out a small fraction of the time. Maybe I go out one day a week, right? I don't go out nearly as often as I used to, but I sleep with like one or two girls a week, or like at least two or three girls a month.
Yeah.
So like the only factor that's really changed is I guess my skin. Now you can make the argument that oh, I'm better looking now, but I don't really think that's the case. I think I've pretty much been the same level of look since I hit puberty, which was around 14. So like, what's the factor that's changed? And I would again say that it's not the volume because I'm doing less volume now. It's got to be the skill, my ability to talk to women, my ability to set up dates, my ability to get over objections, my ability to seduce and sleep with a woman.
Now, do you think that I guess, and I know there's probably different definitions of that, but do you think that the PUA lifestyle is practical for a lot of men? Because this is something that I had thought about. So,
Mm.
obviously, if you're going out to bars and clubs consistently, and this was going on even before the inflation picked up, it is fairly pricey and there's a lot of time. And I've seen a decent share of comments from guys, comments and also forum posts like ex-PUAs saying that they spent a lot of their 20s, even their 30s, and they feel that they kind of, whether they got laid or not, they feel like they used a lot of that energy and a lot of those resources, and they didn't in other areas amount to something. So I guess the question would be, would you say it's wiser for a guy to have, a purpose, cultivating money or status, kind of like Roosh was talking about, and meet women tangentially, or should they kind of go balls to the walls, focusing on PUA as a lifestyle? Because it strikes me that it would be a fairly time consuming. And I know that we market the whole kind of Bill Zarian lifestyle. You're the biggest guy in the gym. You're making tons of money. You're also spinning all these plates. But how practical is that? Because it does, I mean, it's a lot of energy. It's a lot of money. It's a lot
Yeah.
of time, which as a young man, especially if you don't have many resources, can potentially, not necessarily, but can potentially detract from your ability to build in other areas.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I can definitely see. I guess it depends on what we think of as the PUA lifestyle. But if we take it to be like that traditional idea of go out, 4 or 5 days a week, constantly be like, doing approaches and shit like that, then yeah, I would say that it's probably for most guys better to focus on cultivating a skill set and cultivating their life than to focus all their excess energy on going out. And I have seen examples of people I know who's focused way too much of their energy on cold approach, and then they get burned out, and they're in their mid 30s. They have like close to nothing to show for it besides like a few hookups.
Right.
So I think there's definitely a lot of dangers to the pickup lifestyle. But I think that's besides the point. Like you can, when game can be real and the pickup lifestyle can be detrimental to your mental health. Like those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
Yeah. So that'll be kind of like my take on that.
So I guess if you were to define game, like how would you define it?
Yeah, I would say it's your ability to seduce and sleep with a woman without paying her money.
Okay. Let me see if I can pull this one up. I took a note on it because I wanted to get your thoughts on this
Mhm.
one. Yeah, okay. So this one was interesting. You know who David D'Angelo is? I think he's a retired
Yeah.
PUA.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, he actually said that seduction implies tricking, being dishonest, hiding your motives. That's not what I'm teaching. I'm teaching attraction, which is working on yourself, improving yourself to the point where women are magnetically attracted to you and want to be around you. And then, because I hear that a lot, like, well, game is just seduction. I thought that was interesting from a fairly prominent PUA.
Mm. Yeah, I would
Then,
go ahead.
and I guess is kind of an addition to that. Do you believe that a woman has to be physically attracted to you, or do you think that you're based upon your game, you can actually turn her from being totally disinterested to interested. Because I know another guy, Alan Roger Curry, disagrees with that. So I just think it's interesting how
Yeah.
all these PUAs have different perspectives, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a good amount of disagreement in the pickup community. Like I said, in some ways, I probably agree more with the black pill community than with the pickup community. Kind of what I was saying earlier. But no, I don't think that you can take a girl who's not interested, who finds you like physically repulsive, and make her interested through quote unquote game. At least not the vast majority of the time. Maybe if you do this experiment, like you take a guy who has the best game ever, and you take 100 women who are repulsed by him, and he talks to 100 of them, maybe he'll get one of them to fuck him. But the vast majority of the time, if a woman is not physically attracted to you, especially if she finds you repulsive, you're not going to get her to bang you through game. So I do think there needs to be an attraction threshold. And you can make the argument that I would say I would make the argument there's a big difference between the girl finding you repulsive to the girl just finding you okay, right? So I think that if a girl's like, yeah, he's okay looking, that's when, and you can use game to bang her. But I don't think you're going to take a girl who's like repulsed by you physically and then like get her to bang you. At least not the majority of the time.
Right.
But yeah, I do agree that. So I think the pickup community did itself a disservice by arguing that like game can overcome everything. And I think that I do think that the black pill community has a point about how like a lot of the pickup community basically says that game is the end all be all. Like if you're depressed, do game. If you're fucking, your girlfriend broke up with you, do game. If you have childhood trauma, do game. If you're ugly, do game. If you're broke, do game. So yeah, I do think that game and pickup definitely has its inherent limitations. But then the argument is, what are those limitations?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think like on the other side of it too, when you'll hear someone say, if you're not Chad, it's over. That's very easy to disprove. So it comes down to there's a lot of hyperbole, which obviously, it's going to help if you're trying to sell a product. I don't know how many black pillars are trying to sell products at this point, but I know it definitely, if you say game works no matter what, you've got a much larger pool of people who are going to listen to you than if you kind of admit it. And that's where you'll get to where if they're selling the pickup or the game and a guy says, well, it's not working that much, then you'll hear, well, then you have to lower your standards. And I can see how if a guy sees the advertisement and it's this hot chick in lingerie and it's like, well, you're a 3 out of 10, you got to go for a 2 out of 10. He's like, well, that's not what you marketed. Understandably, they'd be a little bit upset, but that's life. I guess go overseas if you want better results, perhaps, you don't know.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think the pickup community did itself a disservice by overpromising shit. You can make the argument that a lot of communities do that. For example, the fitness community, right? They'll say like, oh, take this supplement, this natural testosterone booster, and look like this super jacked dude. When in reality, you're probably not gonna get more than like a 5-10% difference if you try to do natural means of improving your testosterone. So yeah, I think a lot of communities operate like that. It's just like the problem is marketers come into a community and they're like, oh, let's take something good and exploit it and get everyone's money. And then people start throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I agree that there's a lot of scammers in the pickup community, just like there's a lot of scammers in the fitness community. But then I would say, just like we can all agree that fitness is a real thing, just because there's some companies that are way over promising what their supplements can deliver doesn't mean that fitness is not like a real thing, that muscle hypertrophy is not a real thing. So I would say in the same token, just because there's a whole bunch of like PUAs, marketers saying, oh, you can get any girl you want with game, that doesn't mean that the game doesn't exist.
Right.
You see my point?
Yeah, I mean, and I say even for myself, I wouldn't discourage anyone from, picking up a PUA's book per se. I think one of the big problems, going back to that kind of dismissing on the basis of prejudice, we do a lot of that. And what I've learned, and I've tried to impart to my audience, is that if you really want to mature as a person, you don't have to go over and like take the other person's side. But if you at least look at what they're saying, the likelihood is that you're going to learn something and you're going to mature, as opposed to, well, it just doesn't fit exactly how I want to see the world, therefore it's bogus. So yeah, I mean, even to the extent that I'm not entirely sold on this concept of game, I'm sure someone can watch your channel and they can extract value as they could from a lot of other PUAs. It's just a question of when you get information, how do you want to respond to it? And what's your strategy going to be in life?
Yeah. Okay, so let me move on with to the second point. So this is my second issue with the I guess black pill community, and I would say I call it I guess fear mongering. So it's overblowing risk. So I remember when I was like a kid, because my mom was worried about me getting hurt, she would like overblow the risks of like I guess like riding my bike and stuff. She's like, you can get hit by a car, blah 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 blah, right? Well, I see the same thing with the black pill community doing with talking to girls, overblowing the risk. Like I've heard some black pill content creators say, like, "Oh, bro, like, well, every other chick is trying to press charges on you." And I guess why that is dangerous is if you go into interaction with a girl and you think there's a 50% chance that she's going to go to the police and press charges on you, like, unless you're a complete sociopath, you're going to be very weary of talking to her. And unfortunately, there's also a principle called self fulfilling prophecy. So if you feel like you're doing something really, really wrong by talking to a girl that you see on the street, then that vibe is going to resonate with a girl. I'm not saying that means by default she's going to call the police on you, but she's probably going to be more sketched out because you feel like you're doing something wrong. So then she's going to feel like something wrong is happening, and then it's just like this self fulfilling prophecy. So that's kind of another issue, I see with the black belt community. So I'm curious to hear like your take on that.
Yeah, I've always found that line to be a little bit much. Now, they might push back and say the very unattractive guy is more likely to be accused of something.
Sure.
Um, from what I've observed, as far as seeing, say, failed approaches or whatnot, I don't think it's terribly likely. I mean, it's sort of women, there's different types of women, there's different personalities of women. If you approach like a shy girl and you just talk with her, unless you're being overtly creepy, I don't think she's going to call the cops on you.
Right.
So I think there's a little bit of an exaggeration. Now, if you approach the flaming feminist who's just trying to get her time in the sun, you never know. I knew a person that I guess she was living in a city. She had a bunch of roommates. One of them was apparently underage. Well, they had some party. This chick went after a dude, wanted to basically hook up with him, did hook up with him. And then like the very next day, because she also happened to be a kind of progressive leftist, very next day, she accused him of like rape or something like that. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. But it's the same dynamic where maybe it depends on the context. But if you talk to someone enough, you're going to get a sense of who they are, right? And unless they have some very specific political or social agenda,
Yeah.
I don't think most people's responses immediately call the cops unless they have some kind of past trauma, or again, they have their own, political ideology or motivations. So I wouldn't say that's always something to be concerned about. It is a possibility. But yeah.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a theoretical possibility. I would say it's like a low probability. I mean, I would make the argument that I've done in my whole life tens of thousands of approaches. I've never once had the police called on me. Now, it could happen to me tomorrow, right? But like the risk is pretty low. It's like, it's kind of like getting hit by a drunk driver. Like, yeah, of course, there's a risk that, I've never been hit by a drunk driver, but I'm not saying it doesn't happen to other people. I'm not saying it will never happen to me. But in the same token, I still drive my car. Maybe I take certain precautions, like I don't drive at 2 a.m. on New Year's, right? Because it's kind of like asking for it. So in the same token, if you see a chick who looks like ultra cringe feminist, maybe it's better not to approach her. I'm not saying there's like no credence of truth to,
Right.
black people are saying be careful. Yeah, maybe there's some common sense precautions you want to take. But at the same token, I think that going into the mindset of like, oh shit, chicks don't want to be approached. I'm doing something wrong. There's a good chance this chick is going to call the cops on me. That's not a good mindset to have.
Yeah, and well, actually, that's one thing I talked about in the book, slightly related, is I'm not a big fan of the whole lookism stuff, in the sense of, the analysis of the face. I mean, I'm sure if you were trying to be like on Nip and Tuck, that would be a fantastic
Yeah,
thing
it's
if
a
you
good
want to be
show.
a plastic surgeon. But I think that can actually be detrimental because sure, if a guy's got a really recessed chin, maybe he wants to have surgery, or you
Yeah,
have like some disfigurement. But taking myself as an example, I didn't know about most of this stuff until the last couple of years. But I can imagine if I was in that head game of sorts and I'm like, well, yeah, but my ears are kind of large and they're not perfectly symmetrical, and my nose is a little bit crooked. Therefore, it's over unless I get surgery. And then you can keep coming up with excuses when
yeah,
in
yeah,
reality, sometimes you just got to say, okay, um, I'm not perfect. but no one is perfect.
No.
It's kind of like the height thing. I mean, they'll say, "Oh, if you're not 6 feet, it's over." That's obviously ridiculous, right? I mean,
No.
if you're 5'11", you think they can really tell the difference? Not typically. But yeah, I mean, as I try to explain to guys, a study might say something, and if there's a statistic that indicates something, maybe let's say if you drink so and so, you're going to die because it's toxic, right? Okay, so we have a pretty good evidence for that. But just because we know that a lot of women prefer tall men does not mean that you're never going to find a woman that will possibly take you seriously because you're not a certain height. So you
Yeah.
can go by statistics and you can start saying, well, therefore I'm going to limit myself, or you can, well, I'll look for someone that will find me acceptable, or if it's really that bad, I will go overseas. So there's an option, and I don't think it's productive for anyone to be in this kind of my life's over, I might as well rope. I mean, I'm like, life is so interesting. There's so much to do. Why just cut yourself off at the knees, especially at a young age? I think it's
Yeah.
a waste of time.
I think you said a lot of interesting things, so I want to go through them one by one. All things that I agree with. The first thing you were talking about is overglorification of plastic surgery and lookism, which I also agree can be horrible for a young man's psyche. You see like this with some of these like lookism or hardcore black pill communities is like literally all they're doing is talking about plastic surgery. They're glorifying it. They're like a bunch of like insecure like fucking Orange County chicks who are like just obsessed with like plastic surgery. Like it's literally like I'm like, what fucking community am I in right now? But like, dude, I've even had some clients that book calls with me, and I'll be like, I'll ask them questions like, so how tall are you? To find out what to put on their Tinder. And they'll be like, oh, I'm 5'10", but don't worry, dude, I'm gonna get the height extending surgery soon. I was like, that's not what I was thinking at all. Like, why are you doing that? Like, you're actually above average height. They're like, yeah, but I want to be 6'1". I'm like, well, that surgery is not an easy one. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna have to be on crutches. I'm not gonna be able to walk for 6 months, but I think it's gonna be worth it. I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, man. Like, that sounds like a horrible idea. Like to fucking, be half paralyzed for 6 months to gain like 2 or 3 extra inches. Now I think that's one of the more extreme surgeries, but at the same time, I do think like like this lookism and overblowing, looks and just this kind of obsession with whatever you call it, aesthetic perfection is just like very unhealthy. And it's
Right.
more commonly found in girls. Like most of the time, you'll see chicks obsessing over like, their nose, like, oh, my nose is a little too big. So it's kind of ironic to find it in like, this manly community, dudes doing the same exact thing. Now, the
Yeah.
second thing you mentioned is about studies and whatnot. So yeah, I think that we can all agree on the data. Like we can, PUA and a black pillar can look at the same study and say, okay, yeah, clearly chicks like taller guys. Like I don't think anyone is denying that. Like you'd have to be a complete, idiot to like say, no, chicks like short guys. But in the same token, it's like, what do you do about that information? And I think from what I've seen, like the debates I've had with some black pill channels, like We Waffles, for example, kind of the argument that he makes is that, well, like if you're not this 6 foot tall guy, that it's not even really worth trying because chicks are not going to find you attractive. You're not going to meet their criteria, and it's like, what's the point, right? Because you're not in line with the statistical mean for what those girls find attractive, right?
Yeah.
But I would look at that data and say, okay, yeah, if you're not that tall guy, what can you do to get the girl anyway? Like, how can you
Right.
compensate for your lack of height by doing other things? And one of them could be moving to a different country, going overseas. I'm not dismissing that, but there's other things you can do in addition to that. So that would be like two people can look at the same exact study, but have a completely different interpretation of what to do with that data.
Right.
One could have a very fatalistic and nihilistic approach and say, well, if you're not 6'1", you're fucked. And the other one could say, okay, this is interesting. What can we do to help those guys who are not 6'1" still get the results that they want anyway?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also a big thing that not everyone considers is where are you located and what is the context?
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
Because when I live in a fairly rural suburb, so to actually find women that are worth approaching, as opposed to land whales, you have to kind of do a little bit of searching. When I go into the city, if I just ride the metro, I get IOIs from various women. I'm like, if I was living here on a regular basis, it'd be a piece of cake to talk to these people all the time. So that can also matter. That's why I think a lot of PUAs tend to be based in larger cities because you have more people to approach on a consistent
Yeah.
basis. Um, but yeah, like context matters too. And that's one thing I included in the overcoming section is that, okay, maybe you are introverted, maybe you're awkward, maybe going to bars and nightclubs is not ideal. You might consider volunteering at an animal shelter. Oftentimes there are girls that do that activity, and now you already have a commonality. You care about animals. That can be
Sure.
easy to build a rapport. Joining a political campaign, I've seen people
Sure.
go well above their league there. So like anything else, take the information and choose how you want to react to it, but don't assume, just like, because the Stacy's not interested in you, you might find a cute shy girl in a different context. She's probably not going to be at the nightclub. She might be at a
Right.
coffee shop or
Right.
something. But if you go around with like, it'll never happen because I can't pull a model in a club, well, that's just what you're going to do. But you have to decide what you want your life to be. I've never, even if I was awkward and I was frustrated by it when I was younger, I never had the mentality that like this is the end of my life. I'm always striving towards something. That's how I was able to go from not being a terribly competent writer. I've written, just from this channel, I've written like 8 books, and that takes discipline. You have to practice something. You have to be able to see. I think it was an old Native American proverb. They said, "Always look to the mountain because that's the only way you'll reach it." And if you
Mhm.
start saying, "Well, I can't even get up this foothill, I'll never do it," well, then you're never going to do it. So, it doesn't mean looks and height don't matter. It doesn't
Right.
mean you're going to experience no rejection. It doesn't mean you're going to turn into a Casanova overnight. But frankly, if you're 5'5" and introverted and you can get a nice girlfriend, who cares if you're Casanova? At least you're getting that, and that can be a positive thing. And you don't have to fixate on, oh my God, I haven't had sex for like the next 5, 6 years or whatever.
No. I think you have a very, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think you have a very healthy mindset. I wish there was more people have this mindset, honestly. Funny thing that happened to me, I think this was a few months ago. I was on this channel. I don't know if you're familiar with him, MGTOW Dictionary. Have you heard of him?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Good old MD.
Yeah, I was on his stream, and there's a whole funny backstory there. But basically, somehow it became like a 10-on-1, like 10 black pillars teaming up against me. Not that I really give a shit. And they brought on this like plastic surgery student who was supposed to be like a looks expert. I'm not really sure how a 21-year-old
Yeah, that
college
dude,
kid.
that dude's interesting. He's actually got an interesting backstory too. That you know, guy definitely takes things a little bit too seriously. But yeah, he's actually a meme. I think. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think it's called "Short, Ugly, and Brown." It's an actual meme that was based on him or something.
But so the funny thing that happened was they brought on this plastic surgery student, and he was like critiquing my looks, and he was like, "Bro, look at your nose, man. It's like 2 inches to the left," and like
Yeah,
he was getting like all like hopped up on my looks, and I was like, "Okay, where's this going? Like, where are you going with this? Like, I mean, I don't care. You can criticize my ugly nose all you want. I'm not like insecure, but like, where are we going with this?" And he's like, "Well, the point is that you're clearly like a 5 at best." I was like, okay, well then doesn't that kind of disprove like some of the black pill tenets because I banged some really hot girls? And there was like a little bit of a pause. They all stopped and thought about that. And I'm like, how would you explain that? And they're like, well, clearly you must be lying.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
like the conclusion. I was like, that's the conclusion. Like, because it doesn't align with what you're saying, it must mean that I'm lying. Like, well, we don't think you're lying completely. Like, you're probably just like overblowing. Like, the chicks you banged probably were like 4s and 5s too, because you're a 5. I was like, no, like there's like pictures of these girls. Like I have them on my website. Like this chick is clearly like maybe she's not a 10, but she's like a attractive girl. She's like a 7 or whatever. Nah,
yeah.
bro, they must be fake. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
no,
the
I
fuck?
think I think of that guy whenever I think of the overanalysis thing, and I think he's definitely kind of trapped in his own head. And actually, one of the things I talked about in the book was that the danger with the fixation on surgery is that, let's say you get all that surgery and you look like immaculate, you might still be psychologically screwed
Yeah.
up. There was a dude on YouTube some years ago, before I really had any idea about this community. I think he was called like Kyle Incel, and he was about like a normie looking guy. I think probably 5'10", but he had this whole psychological thing that, no one will ever like me. You could
Well,
tell he
there's
was,
a whole book on this, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. He literally wrote about this phenomenon.
yeah. I think I've heard the title. I haven't checked it out yet.
It's a
And
book literally exactly what you're describing.
yeah. And it's like, so maybe you get the surgery and maybe you get a lot more attention and it builds your confidence, or maybe you're still going to be awkward. Like I actually waded through it some years ago. Strangely enough, I read ER's little, discourse before he went postal. And it just struck me as this guy was very much in his own head. Now, he arguably was from a family that didn't really care about him much, which is sad. But if you looked at Elliot Rodger, especially nowadays with the whole K-pop phenomenon, that dude could have easily gotten a decent looking chick. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I
he's not the
agree.
most masculine, but he had that
Yeah,
kind of e-boy look, K-pop, whatever.
especially if you went to the gym, grew out a little facial hair.
Yeah, and he, but I think even without the facial hair, if you're going for the K-pop thing,
Yeah, maybe.
but he would have like the Hugo Boss on. He had a nice car, but mentally he just could not get over it. And he thought, well, why aren't they just worshiping me because
Right.
I exist? And so that's the danger. Surgery might be worthwhile in some cases, but that would not be my first, answer to a person, because surgery doesn't change your mindset. And if you have the
No.
mindset of no one's ever going to like me, you could be that way as an attractive person potentially.
Yeah. No, I mean you should definitely check out the book Psycho-Cybernetics. It was written by a plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz. And what he talked about literally exactly what you're saying is that he would have some clients. Like he said, like for nose jobs, 50% of the girls whose noses they would fix, they would come in like, a few weeks later and they'd be like, "Doctor, my nose is still crooked." And he'd be like, "No, like your nose is like symmetrical." He'd point to them why their nose is completely fixed. And because their self-image is that of a girl with a fucked up nose, they wouldn't believe it, and then they would just go to another doctor and get another surgery. But again, they would just keep doing these surgeries, even though the problem was fixed over and over again because their self image was that of someone who has a facial defect. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that plastic surgeries can definitely, it's not that good for you psychologically. And yeah, I mean, I think in some cases warranted, like if you're disfigured or you're in an accident, I think maybe then it's a good idea. But for I think most people, it's like three steps too far, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the last point that I want to bring up, I guess my last issue with the black pill community is I see a lot of classifying women who are not virgins as lower value, and
Mhm.
I see this time and time again. Like, oh, was your girlfriend a virgin? No. Okay, man. Yeah. So she's like,
Yeah.
so you're dating a low value girl. Now I understand the argument that you probably don't want to date a girl who's fucked hundreds of guys. I
Right.
understand that that's like common sense. I think to most dudes, but at the same time, I don't think that a girl who's not a virgin is just like low value by default. Like I think most women nowadays are not virgins, at least not once in their mid to late 20s. So what's kind of like your take on that?
Yeah. Hey, talking about Undead Chronic, maybe. uh,
Yeah, for sure, definitely
yeah.
him. I was thinking
Yeah.
of
I
a
mean,
few other
I,
guys as well.
I think that's kind of interesting. Now, I don't know if he's pivoted, because I thought for the longest time he was kind of, maybe he wouldn't use the label PUA, but it was kind of red pill, muscles, money, get women. Maybe I'm wrong about that, so I won't speak for him. But um, I think that, like, I'm about to release a video on a guy he's not active anymore, but he was kind of the super obsessed with virginity type of guy. And I think in the end, he ended up marrying a woman who's not a virgin. Um, it's sort of thing. Obviously, if you're traditional and you want to seek marriage, yes, I would say a woman who's a virgin makes a lot of sense. If you're just trying to get laid and you have no real intention long term with this chick, I don't see how it's low value unless maybe she gives you an STD. I
Right.
would say this, and one of the reasons, they say looks, money, status. In the book, I added C for contracts, because what we see a lot is they'll say, well, the black pill's not true because I got married. And it's like, well, think about getting married. That is, in a way, it's red pill, black pill, whatever you want to call it. You had to sign a contract. You had to put your assets on the line, agree to support someone. You're saying it's for love. But in that instance, I could see where if you got the girl and she's still got her looks and she's maybe late 20s, early 30s, and you're saying, well, see, it didn't apply for me. Well, you didn't get her when she was 18 or 21, whether she was a virgin or not by that age. And you had to give all this to be able to secure her long term. So, in a way, that is a major black pill. I'm not saying like, oh, your life is over, but it is interesting. One of the, I think, David Buss studies, I believe, is related to the fact that sometimes women will choose to settle down with a man who's like, okay, makes a lot of money or whatnot. But at the same time, and not every case, but they have studied it, that they will cheat with guys that are considered better looking, better features. So even though this maybe a short accountant guy makes a lot of money, they don't necessarily desire his DNA. Maybe they want this other dude's. And of course, that's not going to be every case, but it is an interesting study nonetheless.
So my question would be this. What are like the tangible benefits to settling down with a virgin? Because I can tell you some detriments are this. One is she's gonna fucking suck in bed, at least initially, right? Because she has
Mhm.
no experience. That's the first one. The second one is chances are is unless she's like 17 or 18, she's either going to be quite religious or she's going to have some major hangups about sex if she's a, virgin in her mid 20s. And if you're religious, that's fine. I guess maybe that's even a pro. But I think most people are not like super religious. So then that's going to be like it's going to be a mismatch in values. If you're like agnostic and she's like very religious, and if she has a bunch of hangups about sex, well, that means your sex life is probably not going to be that great, or at the very least, you're going to have to play therapist and help her get over them. So, what are like the tangible benefits to having a virgin?
I guess they typically cite that study on pair bonding, and I mean, at least from what I've experienced, having dated a couple of girls who were virgins, they tend to be extraordinarily loyal to you. And
Mhm.
maybe they say, well, that's because of a lack of experience or whatever. Maybe it could be. I don't know. I think that's the idea that if you want, and then the other thing, which again, that science is not 100%, but it's the whole microchimerism. I don't know if you've heard of that. The idea that um, a woman carries like genetic traits of men she's slept with beforehand. So if you have a kid with her, is it truly going to be your kid, or will also share traits with these other men?
But like what? Like the jizz is like hanging out her pussy for years, or like how does that work?
Yeah, literally, like the way they explain it is that genetic elements actually are absorbed into her body and can make it back into the reproductive process later on. Um,
Is there
I
like any legit science behind this? Because this seems like
Yeah, I've seen a few studies. Now, granted, it's definitely used in that kind of hyperbolic way. There needs to be a lot more research done on it, but there appears to be at least a bit. Um, yeah, I would say if you were going to settle down, if you're religious, I know the thing about, well, maybe she has an awkward hang up with sex. Um, I haven't found that to be the case. I'm sure if you had, you come from a background where they're always telling you it's bad, they might have a weird reaction to it. Or, of course, one thing that can happen sometimes is that if a girl has been abused growing up, she might also have a strange relationship with it.
yeah.
But I would say if you're going to get married under the Western legal system, hedging your bets, you'd be better off with a virgin. Not guaranteed, because we know every girl who's slept around a lot at one point was a virgin, but you know it can definitely vary. I mean, I had one girl that she was, and her personality. Not that I subscribe to astrology at all, but she was a Leo, and she definitely fit the stereotype. And she was a lot, even though she was a virgin, she definitely was not beyond, in the future, potentially sleeping around. Then I had another one that was more of a Virgo personality, so a little bit more introverted. She was far more conservative and less liable to do that. So, I
Mhm.
mean, it's going to depend on the person's position. But I would think if your goal is to just have sex, be kind of more, have a more libertarian approach, I don't see why it would matter that a woman has slept with other guys, unless, of course, you're worried that you're going to get a disease of sorts.
Yeah, well, the disease thing is definitely a separate point, I think. But so going on the first thing, so I've actually never heard about that. I would really want to see like the studies or the science on that. I've just never heard of anything that like if a chick fucks some dude and then 2 years later she has kids with another dude, that partially that kid is going to be like I just don't think biology works that way. I could be wrong. I just haven't like I would want to see uh like see what this is like a legit science or just like a pseudoscience, like there's a lot of things that people claim to be science like crystals, which is actually like pseudoscience and not really based on any objective proof. But so in terms of the second thing, so okay, so if it comes down to loyalty, what if you have a chick who's not a virgin but she's extremely loyal? Would then she be considered low value? Or if like the only concern is loyalty, then wouldn't you be correct to say, okay, a chick, if she's not a virgin but she's extremely loyal to you, then she's still a high value woman?
I mean, like, as far as I'm concerned, I think if I was going to get married, I mean, I would definitely have bias towards a virgin. But I mean, I think that comes down to the person themselves. I mean, you could say like, this girl is, been with me through and through. Okay, she slept with another dude, but to you, she's high value. Like I was saying, referencing that guy that I'm going to include in the video I'm doing, he would talk about virginity all the time, but it seems like he didn't end up marrying a virgin. So I think there's that element of there's some guys that they do it, maybe it's for shock effect, or they feel like it'll give them more clout or control over women. Um,
Mhm.
I could see it like this. I could see it as a rationalization. So maybe you could say a guy isn't getting laid and he says, well, I will only go for a virgin. It's like, well, that's a different way of squaring it. It's kind of like, were you going your own way or were you sent your own way? Were you fired or you quit? So you can definitely look at it from that perspective. I
Yeah.
think most guys, the reason why they would look at it like marry a virgin if they're marrying in the West is because of they're just hedging their bets because of the legal system. Now,
Mhm.
one thing I don't really like that whole phrase "no hymen, no diamond" because as I don't know if you know the CBP channel, he's kind of interesting. He pointed out that isn't that kind of gynocentric in of itself, even though they say they're rejecting it. Where it's like, why would you give any girl a diamond ring, right? Like, why do you have to do that in 2022?
Yeah.
And they don't really want to answer that because they're like, oh yeah, it's going to offend her if we say no hymen, no diamond. But why would you give a woman a diamond ring? Period. Isn't that kind of simping in a way, right?
Yeah. I would. I think that's a fair point. Yeah, I mean, I think that so I have no problem with dudes wanting, preferring virgins. Like, I think, each guy is entitled to their own preferences. So, for example, I like chicks with big tits and big asses, right? And if someone tries to shame me for that, I'd be like, dude, like that's what I like. I'm not saying you have to bang a chick with big titties. Well, that's what I like to do. So, in the same token, if a guy prefers to marry a virgin, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What I see as problematic, though, is when they take it a step above that and make the claim that women who don't fit their ideal preferences are somehow lower value morally or in terms of value to a man or something like that. And that would be like me saying like a religious person saying, hey, I personally choose to believe in God. Well, that's totally fine. But then if that person says, well, agnostic people are idiots, well, that's something different. Like now you're making a value judgment for people who don't have the same ideals and values as you. Like again, you see this with a lot of communities, like vegans. If someone's like, "Hey, I like to be vegan for these reasons," that's totally fine. You're entitled to eat vegan. But then if you say people who eat meat are pieces of shit, well, that's something different. Now, like I'm going to challenge that. You see my point?
Yeah, and actually, I know there was that clip. I guess was it? I don't know if it was on your show with John Anthony, and he brought the chick on, and then the
Oh
guy.
yeah, yeah, that was my show. Yeah,
And I'm like, okay, I get it if you're trying to get married, but I think most dudes would look at that chick and say, yeah, they'd like to have that experience. I mean, it's kind of like, and I understand why they're doing it, but you see these channels that'll say they're MGTOW and then we're going to roast these women on TikTok. And you see some chick that she's trying to be philosophical while she's in yoga pants with her stuff hanging out. And you're like, oh, she's such a thought and all this. It's like, yeah, but how many of you guys wouldn't like to have that experience, right?
right.
And so again, it comes down to that you can be resentful or angry because you don't have an experience and say, well, see, I've got higher standards. I would only go for a virgin. It's like, okay, but are you saying that if you had the opportunity, you wouldn't, at least experience that for a night? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think a lot of the guys. I think that's a good point, and I think a lot of those guys would. It's like you see like people saying like, "Oh, money's the root of all evil." I think people who are like really rich or should be ashamed of themselves, but it's always poor people. Like if you take those person who's saying money's the root of all evil, and you say, "Hey, do you want $10 million?" They're gonna say, "Fuck yeah," and they'll and then they're gonna enjoy the shit out of that money. They're gonna spend a bunch of shit. So yeah, you see that irony of people when they don't have something criticizing it as a way to compensate for their own, I guess, lack of success in that category. So that's pretty ironic. You see that fairly often. Yeah, I mean, I thought like that whole thing. Like, look, Chronic is entitled to not want to fucking date John's girl. No one's saying he has to. In fact,
Right.
like I'm sure John doesn't want him to actually fucking try to date his girl. But like insulting her to her face and saying that you're low value is just like again, it's the equivalent of like a vegan person saying, "You eat meat, Alex? You're a piece of shit." Well,
Yeah.
that's different than you saying you have a preferences for vegan food. Now you're making a value judgment on me because I don't align with your values. So, like, why am I a piece of shit? Like, and then like that's a whole debate begins. But I don't think anyone has an issue with people having their own preferences. Like, again, like I like big titty Latina girls, right? Like this is, if someone says, dude, you should be ashamed of yourself, I'll be like, okay, well, that's what I like. You don't have to. But I'm not gonna go and like walk around the street and when I see a guy with like a skinny blonde, be like, bro, this is pathetic, man. This chick doesn't even have big tits, man. Like, what are you doing with this skinny blonde? Like,
No.
that would just be like really bizarre behavior.
No. Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if Chronic was if it's a comedy thing. I thought for the longest time he was kind of on again, not a PUA, but kind of red pill self-improvement, muscles and get women. Uh, it was interesting. I caught a little bit of his stream yesterday, and he was talking with this black pillar guy who called in. It was a sort of interesting discussion. Then his co-host, he went on a break, and his co-host took over, and this guy was just, he just seems so gassed up. Like, when you got that, it's almost the phenotype, like the suburban dad who's burnt out working 9 to 5. And so he wants to philosophize to his kids, but he's not really saying anything. The dude's going, I mean, you don't chase money for the sake of money. You don't chase pussy for the sake of pussy. Like, I'm just going, yeah, who does that? Who has a swimming pool that you dive into with a bunch of money like Scrooge? You pursue money typically because you want independence, or you want security, or you want luxury. You're not doing it because you just love holding money, at least not most people. And just like the whole thing with women, they'll say, and this is one criticism I have, even as much as I talk about guys should have a vision, I don't like when people will say to these black pill incels, like, well, just don't even worry about that. And you're saying, okay, but why do people pursue women? It could be because of an orgasm, but a lot of it's actually social. You grow up from a young age, you see advertisements, you see movies, music, whatever. They're constantly browbeating that people who are successful, people who are well liked, are having sex all the time. So it's not just you getting that experience of an orgasm, but it's also being at some level accepted by society that you're a normal person. You can get someone who likes you enough to do that. And it's interesting. You go back to like when Captain Cook was traveling, he went to Tahiti. And sex was actually a public thing. You would be like going at it, and people would be cheering and whooping.
Oh, really?
Spectacle. But then he went to the Maori cultures, and they were very conservative and uptight. So it's sort of interesting. But yeah, I don't like that whole dynamic where it's like, well, you shouldn't even care about having sex. And it's usually a person that has had sex, and so they're not in that, teenage virgin, oh my God, I'm not a real man until I've gotten laid type scenario. So that's one aspect of where these guys aren't as helpful towards black pillars. So yeah, I mean,
That's interesting. I didn't know that about this complete off topic, but about Tahiti. This was when, like, the 1600s.
I believe 16 or 1700s, I believe. So,
And
but
so
there's yeah,
people were just banging in public, and like that was like,
yeah, on Tahiti. I mean, they were like, and it's actually interesting because the Europeans went on there and they were getting like, I don't know if they were getting syphilis or they were giving the natives syphilis.
yeah, no one was wearing condoms back in those days.
No. But there's a fantastic book. It's called Blue Latitudes, and this guy basically followed the travel of Captain Cook, all these different places, and learned about the cultures, and it's really interesting. Like, it's also quite funny, and he interviews one dude. I think it's in New Zealand. And
Was Captain Cook Blackbeard, or is that someone different?
No, Captain Cook was like a big explorer.
Oh, okay.
And the guy says, well, yeah, there's all this negativity about the Europeans colonizing us, but what if it had been China? I mean, I hate Chinese food. And I was like, hell yeah. So there's different perspectives, but it's a good book. So.
Yeah. Well, as a complete side note, one of the best things in Fiji is the Indian food, because a lot of Indians went over to Fiji and New Zealand and that part of the world. And that's why, like, the Indian food there is like really fucking good. Like, some of the best Indian food I ever ate in my life was in New Zealand, funny enough.
Okay.
But yeah, so moving on to the next point. So this is kind of what you went through my general critiques. Now this is more like specific. So I guess I was hoping you could kind of expand on this. So in your videos, you say if you want a woman nowadays, you're probably gonna have to simp. So I guess, like, what do you mean by that, and like, what's your definition of simping?
Well, I think simping is obviously going to be based upon different perspectives, but like what I've said is, if you take a guy and they say like, go to the gym and lift weights to get women, right? Now you could say that you're lifting weights because it's good for your own health, but depending on how much time you're investing in that, it is in a way a form of simping. I mean, because you could say like, oh, I'm gonna ride a bicycle, right? That's maybe less involving. You might not need to take a bunch of supplements or whatnot, but you're specifically doing X number of things. I've got to do this. I've got to have a good Instagram profile, at least if you follow Fresh and Fit. I've got to do X number of things, which in a way, these various strategies are gynocentric in nature, right? You're not saying like, I am a man, take me as I am. You have to be the best or be one of the best if you want to be successful. So to some degree, you're turning yourself into a court jester for women. Now, that's just the way that obviously things function, because our society is not really a pro-male society by really any stretch nowadays. So I mean, it depends how you categorize it, but yeah, I think a lot of whenever you see like, okay, build up the Instagram profile, make sure you have this type of fitness or drive this type of car, dress this sort of way, you're doing a bunch of things to tickle the fancy of a woman. Now, obviously, you
Mhm.
want to get laid, that's what you're going to have to do at some level. Unless you're just an exceptionally good looking guy, you're not going to be able to show up in like baggy clothes and just like go to town,
Mhm.
right? So,
Mhm. Yeah, I guess if you define simping like that, then you're probably correct. I guess the way I always thought of simping is like doing way too much for a person that you like. So, for example, I have a crush on Jenny from next door. So I get her a bunch of gifts and I like fucking maybe buy her a car or I take her out to a fancy restaurant. Like I'm just going way overboard because I like her. It's not something I would do for like, a different girl, right? So
sure.
that's kind of the way I always thought of simping. But things like going to the gym, focusing on your fitness, driving a nice car, you're not doing that just for one girl. You're also doing it for yourself. I'm sure driving, I don't have the nicest car, but I've driven nice cars and it's pretty fun to have like, like driving a Lamborghini is like intrinsically rewarding to some extent. And you can make the argument that you're, largely doing it for the girls, and that's fine. But it's still things that are like rewarding, like going to the gym. Assuming you like it, like, if you don't, then I guess it's more simping. But for someone who's legitimately into lifting weights, like I am, like, let's say, like, whatever, my dick gets chopped off tomorrow. I mean, I guess I would go through a big depression period, but once that's over, I would go back into lifting, right? Because I enjoy lifting for its own merit, not just for the chicks. And, the fact that girls like my body is just like a nice little bonus. So is that like simping at that point, you think? Or,
Well, I guess it's to the extent that if you have to fundamentally change aspects about yourself, I mean, I put it this way, like a big thing that you saw with guys like Roosh and also Victor Pride, who was maybe less of a PUA, but definitely in the self-improvement, was the promotion of the what do they call it? It's the dark triad kind of narcissistic
Mhm,
personality.
mhm,
And so what I'd say is if that's not you as a person, but they're telling you you have to do that. Like Troy Francis, in one of his books said, regardless of who you are, you have to act like you can get women, right? So if you have to fundamentally change aspects about yourself and your lifestyle in order to in order to act in a way that women are going to enjoy, but if you're doing that and you're compromising what you actually feel, how you want to live your life, that's where I see the variation. And that's really going back to the whole question of whether you should be going out to bars or nightclubs, or does this guy have a social circle? I've said if a guy is really interested in like anime and comic books and he tries to build a social circle, realistically it's probably going to be a sausage fest. Now if
mhm,
you were to say I'm going to invest my time and energy into a YouTube channel on this, or like a Twitch streaming channel, that's probably going to bring some of those cosplay anime girls to
mhm.
him if he gets
Right.
some following. So he's not like throwing aside what he really likes, whatever his passion is, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
He doesn't have to make all these changes just for women, essentially. And I understand lifting weights is good for yourself, but I'm talking about if there was a guy that said like you'd rather do a different type of activity, but they're like,
Mm,
well,
mm,
if you really want women, you've got to be lifting weights, that kind of thing.
mm. What about if you have a guy, for example, whose initial motivation for going to the gym is so he can get girls? So let's say it's a skinny guy and he's like, "Oh, I want to get laid," and then he starts going to the gym, and then he just starts really enjoying bodybuilding, and the motivation shifts, and he starts doing it for himself. Would you say that guy is simping at that point?
I mean, sure if it works for you, but it's also there like what are you trying to achieve? Because one dude got really pissed off with me because I was talking about the guys I know who are very successful bodybuilders. I mean, they're spending like 2 hours, sometimes 4 hours a day in the gym. And this dude was like, no, I don't spend that much time. And he gave me a figure and it was like 10 minutes off from what I said per day. And I was like, all right, dude,
Yeah.
really won the argument. But yeah, I mean, if you don't really enjoy lifting weights, and then but you're doing it anyway because of women, yeah, I could see that if you're paying for a gym membership and you could just be, I don't know, doing push-ups, you prefer to do push-ups than lift weights, you know. uh, but yeah, I mean, if it's beneficial to you, that's fine. But if you're doing something you really don't like, or you're changing your entire habits and lifestyles uh, specifically to gesture max for a woman, I mean, you could have that discussion and decide how much it's worthwhile for you or not.
Okay, but why do you say gesture max? Because, like, let's take something like going to the gym. Even if your motivation is mainly to get pussy, you're not like running around like a jackass by going to the gym and working out. So why do you say gesture maxing? Or
Essentially, when you're saying, all right, so you listen to Fresh and Fit, and Fresh and Fit would tell you XYZ you have to do if you want to get women, right?
Mhm.
And then you say, okay, so I have to live my life in a certain way
Mhm.
such that women are going to respond positively to it, right? Now, if
Mhm.
that's just stuff you incorporate in your routine, it's whatever. But if you have to start if you start detracting from yourself and what you really want to achieve for
Mhm.
women, yeah, it is a form of, I think it is a bit of a form of gesture maxing or simping, which of course these terms are very subjective in of themselves, but
Mhm. Yeah, I guess if we look at simping like that, then I would say that simping is not always even a bad thing. Like, take myself, for example. My initial motivation for going to the gym was mainly to get chicks. And then I got really into bodybuilding for its own sake and I started enjoying it. So even though my initial motivation, you can say, was simpy, it worked out, for the better because I discovered something I like. I'm a little bit more healthier now, I'm more fitness oriented. When I got into bodybuilding, I got more into diet, I stopped drinking, right? So there's like all these carryover like positive effects. In the same token, I think I got, like if someone like, let's just say they're like a little, they're not really focusing on their business. They're kind of watching a lot of TV. And then they're like, they discover a pickup or red pill channel. It's like, oh, get your finances in order. And then they're like, okay. And then they go, balls deep on their business. And then, they start legitimately enjoying finding fulfillment from their business,
yeah.
and they get their finances in order. Maybe they stop spending so much time watching TV or reality TV, even if the motivation initially was just to get pussy. Well, overall, that turned out to be a good thing. So maybe even though the guy was simping initially by this definition, it still was a net positive because now he makes more money, he's more fulfilled, his finances are in order, he doesn't spend so much time doing stupid shit. You see my point?
So are you saying that through his business, he's interacting with women?
No, I'm saying that his initial motivation might have been to get chicks because he saw some red pill YouTuber saying, "Get your finances in order if you want to, get chicks." And so he went and did that. But then that had all kinds of positive benefits on his life. So while his motivation wasn't the best, it still turned out to be positive. In terms of his life. Like you have situations in history where someone had a bad motivation, but the action was actually a good thing for history and for society and for
Right.
people in general. Uh, like stuff like that. So I guess like in some cases, then simping is not even a bad thing. It could be a good thing if it has a positive effect on your life.
Yeah, I think it again, if you talk about those instances of the guys who did the nightlife thing, the club life thing for a long period of time, and it detracted from other aspects. That's what I would refer
Yeah,
to.
that would be a bad. Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
a
I mean, like I said, I mean, even to the extent that that exists, if you said, okay, for 6 months or a year, I just want to really focus on this for the experience, that's one thing. But if it gets
no,
to where it's highly, it's very costly, and obviously it's getting more expensive with inflation, and you keep doing that, and you're not on your purpose. I hate that term, but you're not on
no,
your purpose.
no,
Yeah, you could say it's a form of simping, but I mean, it doesn't mean so. Just because like you're saying, just because it's a motivation is simping doesn't mean it has to be in the long run. But
no.
there are guys who that's where it ends because getting women is the end all and they lose
Right,
sight of everything else.
right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think I've heard some scientists argue that sexual selection is even stronger of a motivator than natural selection, right? So, meaning like if it wasn't for for like men's desire to bust a nut, then we as a society wouldn't be anywhere near where we are now. So, a lot of things that men do, they were initially motivated by like, oh, I want to get laid, right? And then like 20 years later, they've invented electricity or something like that, right? So, I think sexual selection which ties into simping, can actually be a force for good in some occasions. Now, of course, it can also be a source of bad if the guy, like you said in the club example, he wastes 5 years going to clubs, he doesn't even enjoy clubs, all because he's trying to bust a nut. Well, that's not good. But if a guy really wants to stand out to women, and then he like starts a successful business and then invents something that's important to society, well, clearly then simping was a good thing, in the long run.
Right. And that could also be, I mean, let's say you're a Roosh and you're writing books on it or whatnot, then you've got a business component. That's why I think like sometimes I've heard like the acronym, I think it's ABA, like always be approaching. And I'm like, well, if you're writing books on it or you're running boot camps on it, obviously this could be beneficial from the standpoint of getting women, but it could also be beneficial from the standpoint of making money. So it could depend on the person and the circumstance.
Right, right. No, I agree with that. I guess the last thing I guess I wanted to bring up was what one of the in one of your videos you made this argument that one of the big tenets of the pickup community is you know if you well, like you have to be assertive, right? So guys can go out and like be a dick to the waiter. But I guess I think that's like a very incorrect uh characterization of what it means to be assertive because like I don't know. I don't think anyone's teaching. Like I agree with you. It's like really dumb to go out and try to be a dick to a male waiter in an attempt to get a girl. Like I would never in a million years advise a client to do that. First of all, it's not going to work. You're just going to look like a piece of shit to the girl in the first place. So it's not even an effective strategy. And second of all, you're just being a dick to someone who's quote unquote beneath you. But I guess where did you come to that conclusion that that's what it means to be assertive in the pickup community?
Well, from like the content promoting like that dark triad male personality,
Okay.
extreme narcissism, where and I actually knew a guy who was really into the gym, really into the pickup stuff, and the way he explained it was that all press, regardless of whether it's bad or good, is good for you. So his theory was that even if people think that I'm a dick, they have a negative impression, they're going to still be talking about me. And so that means that women are going to hear more about me, whether it's in a work setting, school, or whatever. And so that was his theory, that even if they say, oh, you're a horrible human being, they're going to be interested in you. And that, interest is going to potentially draw them over. It's kind of like, and I know that some people feel the interpretation isn't fair, but it's kind of like the negging concept, like break down her self-esteem, don't give her a compliment, point out something that's wrong about her, so she'll be curious and she's more, who is this guy, essentially.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do know there's some PUAs who are big on the dark triad stuff. I mean, I would make the argument you can be very successful with women without being narcissistic or manipulating them or being rude to people. I would use myself as an example. But okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from with that. Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder if you would have like a different opinion of the pickup community if you were like researching it now versus like several years ago. Because a lot of the content creators you mentioned are like more older, like Krauser, Roosh, like no one really knows about them nowadays. They're more like 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I've seen definitely a lot of that, more of, I think, acceptance of the looks do matter, looks are important, whatnot. I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you've been in the loop with this whole Coach White Pill and Kevin Ray Wilder stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really interesting. And of course, people might say, well, he just wasn't trying hard enough. But what I took away from it is that Coach White Pill was doing pretty well with Asian women in Vietnam. But then once they went to United States, I think they were in Reno or maybe Las Vegas, he was struggling a lot more. Whereas Kevin Ray Wilder, who arguably is probably a better looking guy, all things considered, didn't have a problem. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because at least one of the two of them was more pro game. The other one was like, yeah, game matters, but looks also matter. So it's just interesting to see these developments.
Yeah, no, I see your point. I would say that one is probably more of a coincidence, because it's like they were just born looking wildly different. Like Kevin is like 6'2", Coach Whitepill is like 5'7" or something like that, right? So they're just like born like from birth. They were quite different people. Yeah, I mean, I wonder what would have happened if it was in reverse. Like, for example, meaning Kevin was the pro game one and Coach Whitepill was more, about looks. But I can tell you, like, me and Kevin would pretty much think like largely the same. Like him and I don't really disagree on much. So we're like basically the same. We think looks matter, game matters. They're both important. I wouldn't say one is like, so much more important than the other. They're both important. With looks, it's important, especially to meet the girl's threshold. So meaning if she finds you repulsive, well, then it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, and I'd be curious more so when it relates to dating apps, because I have tried stuff like, I don't know if you know Chase Amante. I tried some of this stuff, and it sort of worked, but it also seemed to be the case that even if you cultivate the whole, like, they say have a great personality, and that's actually another topic that's very interesting, the whole like have a great personality, improve your personality, which is, that's a little bit more complex than the way it's marketed. But yeah, I find a lot of these girls, even if you make that effort in personality, many of them still will ghost. And so most of my efforts I do in person, because I find dating apps for the most part a waste of time. But it is interesting to see guys talk about, well, if you have a profile this way, if you have a Instagram with a bunch of followers, you can tip the balance. So, who knows?
Yeah, so the thing with dating apps is they've gotten more and more competitive in every year. So, Tinder came out in 2012, 2013, and between 2014 and 2016 was the quote unquote golden period in the US. And basically, as long as you had somewhat decent photos, you were probably getting laid. Unless you were doing something majorly wrong, it was like pretty easy for most guys. So that was like when Tinder was at its peak. And then 2017, more and more people started discovering it. The hype kind of wore off and it became more and more competitive to the point where now, like, you do have to be extremely competitive if you want to see consistent results on Tinder. Now, me personally, like, I can still get laid fairly often from dating apps, even though I'm not like the best looking guy. But I have been very competitive, meaning like, I've constantly optimized my photos. I doubt most people have the quality of photos and stuff that I do, right? Because I put a lot of work into it. So versus like 6 years ago, you didn't really have to do that. Like, you just have a few decent photos and you're pretty much set. So yeah, I do think dating apps have gotten more competitive, and I think a lot of dudes, they're coming into the dating app. They don't have the requisite profile to overcome the barrier to entry, and they're getting very discouraged. And sometimes they're coming to incorrect conclusions, and they're assuming, oh, I'm too ugly for Tinder. Well, no, it's not that you're too ugly for Tinder. It's just that Tinder is very competitive, and your photos aren't that great. Your texting structure isn't that great, so you're not necessarily too ugly, but you're just not, able to keep up with your competition, basically.
Yeah, I would agree. I remember back in 15 and 16, it was definitely a lot smoother to actually, for them to even want to hang out. What I do say to black pillars is that sometimes you'll hear this thing like all women are on Tinder. It's like, no, that's not true. And, if you have that mindset, one of the problems with Tinder, of course, I think the ratio is something like 70-30.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And so what I tell some of these guys, especially if they're more introverted, is you might be better off, you almost certainly will be, finding an environment in real life where the gender ratio is in your favor. And Tinder
Right.
is not going to be that for most people. I mean, there can be exceptions, but if you find, just like the whole thing with going to the gym, that can work, obviously, but some guys might have success if they join a kickboxing class because a lot of women do kickboxing. And so now you have a social environment, they're classmates, it's excuse to talk to each other, whatnot. So that can also be an angle instead of saying, well, I can only use Tinder or I can only use cold approach. So yeah, there's different options for different people. But.
Yeah, no, I think everyone should be open to all options. Like, I'm not a fan of saying like, "Oh, this is the only way," or like, "Don't do this option." It's like, why? If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. In terms of different ratios, I think another important factor to keep in mind is where you live. So, someone who lives in a second-tier city like Albuquerque or let's say Cincinnati will have much better results on Tinder than someone who lives in a first-tier city like Miami or Los Angeles. Like, the ratio is going to be completely different. Your competition is going to be a lot less. So like those factors matter as well. It's not like all the same. Like, if, for example, you go somewhere internationally, like you go to Colombia or you go to Eastern Europe, Tinder's actually really fucking good. Like
Right.
the golden era is still going on over there. And there's a variety of factors for that. So like Tinder is not all the same. It heavily varies based on, where you live. That's like a big factor right then and there.
Yeah, no, I remember when I went to Dominican Republic a few years ago, it was like night and day. It was like, wow,
Oh
actually,
yeah.
I feel valued on Tinder all of a sudden.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, like in like countries like that, Dominican Republic, yeah, like those island nations, yeah, you will definitely have way better results with the same exact profile.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know you mentioned you wanted to, take off by 10:30 because you have an early schedule tomorrow.
Yeah.
I was just gonna go through some questions, but if you gotta take off, no worries. I
Like,
guess do you want to like plug your channel so people know where to find you and stuff?
sure. My channel is Martin Goldberg. Used to go by another handle, which I think people mention in there, Economic Invincibility. Yeah, so I'm at that channel. I am actually looking. I might start streaming in the future. I'm not really sure. And if you search Martin Goldberg on Amazon, I've written a number of books on different topics. So depending on your interests, you may want to check them out. I always tell people when it comes to books on Amazon, like the eBooks, if you whatever short on money, you can buy the ebook. You have like 7 days, and most of my books are not long, so you can just read it and return it and get a refund. And I'm cool with that. I just ask people to check it out and see what they think, because even like I said, if you hardcore believe in PUA, the book Understanding Overcoming the Black Pill has a lot of information that's interesting, historical and whatnot, scientific. So that's worth considering. But I can take a few questions.
Okay, cool. Yeah, guys, let's we'll go through a few questions. Someone said, "Dude, Martin, the world needs your voice more." Someone
Oh,
said, "Wasn't expecting this rational debate discipline. There was no off-based ad hominem attacks."
I failed. I failed. Yeah.
Okay, let's see what questions we have. Someone said, the fact that he said you could refund is pretty badass." Okay. Let me find some good questions. There's like a pretty robust discussion going on in the chat, so mostly people are just like chatting between each other. Someone said this: "Didn't you used to show your face before? Is that true or no?"
Yeah, absolutely. I used to do vlogs, and actually, that's kind of ties into the point I made about the anime and comic book guy, because I was obviously your height doesn't show when you're sitting down in a chair. Some people thought I was like 5'7" or something, but when I was doing vlogs, I had a number of girls who contacted me like, "Oh, you got a cool channel, let's hit up or whatnot." Which is interesting because again, I had probably like 20,000 subs. So I tell people even a little bit of status can actually help. There might be that girl you find just really likes your online personality or whatnot. So that can help too. Sometimes, we have all this technology. Forget about Tinder. Maybe you're focusing on something you really like, and then through that, tangentially, you meet someone that you could, date or whatnot. So.
Yeah. So why did you stop showing your face?
Actually, strangely enough, it was because my laptop was running out of space saving all those videos. So if I just did the recorded ones, it was a little bit more compact.
Oh, so it was just like for for that reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, what else do we have? What are your thoughts on FaceTime features on dating apps could help men out? And someone says, what are your thoughts on FaceTime features on dating apps? Could that help men out on the online dating world? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to help men. I don't think it's going to hurt men necessarily either. Why would it help men? It's just like, because you're not the only one that can do it. If they only gave you this power, then yeah, it would be helpful to you. But it's not going to affect the ratio. It's not going to affect the marketplace. What do you think, Martin?
I mean, it can to a certain degree. I would say I did recently try. It is a pay-per-use app that's a little bit more on the traditionalist side, I guess.
Which one?
Catholic Match,
Okay.
and that seemed to have better results. You have to pay money to access it, but it seemed to have better results. The girls were more interested, but most of them, of course, they're looking to get married. So that's, if you're trying to be a PUA, that might not be ideal. But for those that are more on the conservative side, or I want to get a virgin, well, that might be a place to check out. So.
Someone said, has Martin ever dedicated any time to getting results for an AK game, or does he just study this stuff?
Oh yeah. I still make approaches, and like I said, I try to do it as part of a routine. So I do it at Starbucks a great deal. If I'm shopping at a store, I tend to focus on girls if they're working there, just because I find that if you don't ask them out the first time for whatever reason, you have a better chance of actually seeing them again. But yeah, I try to put into practice, because it goes back to that thing of don't just dismiss outright, but try things. And certainly if we were to just say game is improving your personality, I mean, I've done that. I wrote a little ebook talking about the experience of, like, if you're very shy, you can start with just talk to like a senior citizen. A lot of old people, they don't have people to talk to them. And so you can start building that communication competence, and then it becomes easier to just talk to anyone, right? And it doesn't have to be complicated like a pickup line. When you're talking to a girl, it can just be like, I like your shoes, or something of that nature, and that can start a conversation. So I do practice it. I'm not as successful as Alex, I'm sure, but I do practice here or there.
Oh, I banged my fair share of grandmas. So someone said this. Can you please explain who D Gay 5 was? I'm not sure what they're talking about. Do you know?
Yeah, so there was this user who would keep posting and say, "Show your pee, show your pee," and I
Oh,
was like,
Jesus.
okay. And they actually started this whole like fan accounts, and there was like Goldberg's sister Martina, and there was like Goldberg's grandma, and they were all like coordinating and making comments and whatnot. And the de-gayify guy just kind of disappeared after a while. He said he got sick of posting the same message, so I don't know who he was.
Jesus Christ. Someone said this. Thoughts on Hell by the Dashboard Light for Martin. I don't know what they're talking about, but maybe you do.
Thoughts on Hell by the I don't know what that is.
Okay. All right, let's just move on. Are there any core concepts that you disagree with Alex on that was not discussed today?
I mean, not particularly. I guess we had a bit. I mean, I guess the whole simping thing, we have different perspectives. But like I said, with the manosphere, I think I mentioned that earlier, that people fight over the 2 to 5%, and then oftentimes people who have essentially the same positions, like lift weights and pursue women. And it's like, no, we're enemies. I think it's maybe the fact that it's a replacement for, if we want to say, blood sports, or maybe something less violent, like men fighting it out, and it shows you're more masculine, but it does get a little bit catty at times, and I
Yeah.
lose interest in it. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Top 3 places to meet ladies in real life for you.
well, I guess let's exclude overseas. I'd say coffee shops. Malls, of course, as I talk about in the book, a lot of malls are shutting down, so maybe less so. But I like to have some semblance of a social background, but I'll just talk with girls where they're working. So whether that's a restaurant, whether that's a retail store, that's typically where I'll meet them.
Okay. Someone asked this. What are your thoughts on Alan Roger Curry's Mode 1?
It's an interesting book. Some people, if you've read the book, it's a little bit more clear. I mean, some people say it's just going up and, being perverted, which I think he would argue it's a little bit more complicated. And I quoted him earlier where he said that you can't just make a girl who doesn't like you. Uh, I think it's worth reading. I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't appreciate me saying that, but most of these books you can find like on PDF Drive or Z Library, so you don't even have to buy them if you don't want to. But
Yeah, I would say if you can't afford like a $20 book, then you have bigger problems.
yeah.
The topic of the book. Have you ever heard of Jay Dyer?
Yeah, I've listened to a little bit of him. I know I watched, it was like Trent Horn maybe, or some other people. They were saying that Jay Dyer's all over the place. Like he says he's Eastern Orthodox, and he was Catholic, then he was Protestant, then he was an atheist. I watched a little bit. I don't like his style. He comes off as a bit arrogant, but I mean, that doesn't mean he doesn't have anything good to say. But.
Okay. I mean, I think that was basically all the questions we had. Dude, thank you so much for coming on, man. Like, you're definitely one of the most reasonable, quote unquote, black pillars I've had on my channel. And I thought this was a really good discussion. I think, honestly, you and I don't even disagree on much. We largely agree. So, yeah, I think it was a good discussion. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I think it was a good interaction. And like I said, as I emphasized before, if you guys are interested about the book, you can get the ebook. You have 7 days. You can just read it. It's not long. And let me know. Just let me know what you think about it, you guys. And if there's stuff, like if I come across stuff that I think needs to be added, I will do so. I'm always about constantly improving things. So.
Do you have an audiobook version?
No. I don't know. I don't know if people could stomach my voice for that long.
Well, you could just get like a narrator or something like that.
Yeah, true.
Pay some voice actor like $1,000, $2,000. Yeah, I think you should definitely at some point consider doing the audiobook version, because a lot of people like me who like prefer audiobooks for like, for a lot of people that might be like the make it or break it thing. It's like, oh fuck, no audiobook. Oh god damn it, and then they just put it off forever. So it can be helpful. But yeah, man, it was a good discussion. Thanks for coming on, everybody. Make sure you smash the like button. Go check out Martin's channel. He's got a lot of good stuff on there. Show him some support by subscribing to his channel. And yeah, we got another debate tomorrow night. I think tomorrow one's is going to be a lot more confrontational because it's going to be with the vital message. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So yeah, guys, make sure you subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Martin's channel. Until next time.
All right, thanks. Everyone have a good weekend. Or the rest.